Our Bible reading, the 10th chapter of the book known as 1 Corinthians, verses 1 through 6. I'll be reading from the New King James translation. Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud and passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food. All drank the same spiritual drink. For they drink of that spiritual rock which followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted.
Thank you for that reading. Thank you for that powerful song service. We are beginning quite a bit later this morning than usual, but I'm not sorry for that. I'm sorry for you because I have a longer sermon today than usual. And I will call your attention to Numbers chapter 16. And we're going to read this text together. I don't normally read this much on a Sunday morning service. I thought about condensing it. Probably could just do that. But I believe the text needs to be read. And all we'll do that together here in just a moment. While you're turning there, I do want to say and observe that it took about a year, roughly, at the foot of Mount Sinai for God to transform a bunch of slaves into a mighty nation of people. God gave them a good and a glorious law which to conduct their lives. They were able to complete and erect the tabernacle, a place of worship for all the people of Israel to assemble on a regular basis and there praise their God and have a corporate worship time together. They're now prepared to go to the land of Canaan and inherit a land flowing with milk and honey that God had first promised to Abraham. Your descendants, he said, will possess this land. It's now time to claim that possession. We all know, however, that when they got to the borders of Canaan, they dispatched 12 spies, and when they returned, 10 of those 12 spies said, indeed, it is a land that flows with milk and honey. However, the cities are well fortified, and the inhabitants of the land make us appear to be grasshoppers in our own sight. They are giants in the land. In other words, we're not able militarily, strategically, or in any other way to go in and possess this land, and so they discouraged the hearts of the people. God was so enraged at their lack of faith that he declared that they would wander aimlessly in the wilderness a year, for every day the spies were in the land. So for 40 years they were to wander until that entire generation died. Now we've heard this before. We understand that there's a powerful lesson here in a lack of faith. But there's an aspect to this that I don't think we often pay that close attention to. I would like to invite you to put yourself in the sandals of Moses for just a moment. He has now led this congregation from Egypt to Mount Sinai, now to the borders of Canaan, and Moses is now hearing this message and decree from God. How do you suppose the people of Israel are looking at Moses? Turn over to chapter 15. And in chapter 15, right after this, it would appear, chronologically, an incident occurs where a man is picking up sticks on the Sabbath day. It's reported to Moses. They arrest the man, and Moses said, I will inquire of the Lord what should happen to him. And the Lord said, take him outside the camp and stone him to death. And they did. Now, I want you to put yourself in Moses' sandals again for just a moment. How do you suppose people who've just learned we're going nowhere fast? And while we're going nowhere fast, we have these rigid rules to follow, and if you violate them, this is what happens to you. How do you suppose they view Moses now? Well, chapter 16 answers that question for us. And I want to read this text together. We'll do so quickly. Now Korah, the son of Issachar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took men. And there rose up before Moses with some of the children of Israel 250 leaders of the congregation, representatives of the congregation, men of renown. They gathered together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, for all the congregation is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" So when Moses heard it, he fell on his face. He spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, "Tomorrow morning the Lord will show who is his and who is holy, and will cause him to come near to him. That one whom he chooses he will cause to come near to him. Do this. Take censers, Korah and all your company, put fire in them and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Lord chooses is the Holy One. You take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi." Moses said to Korah, "Hear now, you sons of Levi, is it a small thing to you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the work of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to serve them? And that he has brought you near to himself, you and all your brethren, the sons of Levi, with you? And are you seeking the priesthood also? Therefore you and all your company are gathered together against the Lord. And what is Aaron that you complain against him?" Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, "We will not come up. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey?" They're referring to Egypt. "To kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us? Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." Moses was very angry and said to the Lord, "Do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt one of them." And Moses said to Korah, "Tomorrow you and all your company be present before the Lord, you and they, as well as Aaron. Let each take his censer and put incense in it, and each of you bring his censer before the Lord, 250 censers, both you and Aaron, each with his censer." So every man took his censer, put fire in it, laid incense on it, and stood at the door of the tabernacle of meeting with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. The glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "Separate yourself from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces and said, "O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and you be angry with all the congregation?" So the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the congregation, saying, Get away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram." Then Moses rose and went to Dathan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, "Depart now from the tents of these wicked men, touch nothing of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins." So they got away from around the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of their tents with their wives, their sons, and their little children. And Moses said, "By this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works. For I have not done them of my own will. If these men die naturally like all men, or if they are visited by the common fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belong to them, and they go down alive into the pit, then you will understand that these men have rejected the Lord." It came to pass, as he finished speaking all these words, that the ground split apart unto them, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up with their households, and all the men with Korah, with all their goods. So they and all those with them went down alive into the pit. The earth closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. Then all Israel who were around them fled at their cry, for they said, "Lest the earth swallow us up also." And a fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering incense. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, to pick up the censers out of the blaze, for they are holy, and scatter the fire some distance away. The censers of these men who sinned against their own souls, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering for the altar, because they presented them before the Lord. Therefore they are holy, and they shall be a sign to the children of Israel." So Eleazar the priest took the bronze censers, which those who were burned up had presented, and they were hammered out as a covering on the altar, to be a memorial to the children of Israel, that no outsider who is not a descendant of Aaron should come near to offer incense before the Lord, that he might not become like Korah and his companions, just as the Lord had said to him through Moses. On the next day, all the congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." Now it happened, when the congregation had gathered against Moses and Aaron, that they turned toward the tabernacle of meeting, and suddenly the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Then Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment." And they fell on their faces. So Moses said to Aaron, "Take a censer and put fire in it from the altar, put incense on it, and take it quickly to the congregation, and make atonement for them, for wrath has gone out from the Lord. The plague has begun." Aaron took it as Moses commanded, ran into the midst of the assembly, and already the plague had begun among the people. So he put in the incense and made atonement for the people, and he stood between the dead and the living. So the plague was stopped. Now those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the Korah incident. So Aaron returned to Moses at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, for the plague had stopped. Again, I wanted to read this because I wanted you to give some insight into how people think. And this is not really that out of the question, or should I say, out of the norm, as far as human nature is concerned. Here are people that have just been told, "You're not going to enter the land of Canaan." And so for 40 years, you're going to wander aimlessly. Often, the leadership takes the brunt of criticism when things are not going well. It's the leadership's fault. So we have two groups melding into one. We have one led by Korah. Korah was a Levite. He was part of the Levite clan that God had chosen to be furniture keepers, basically. They were assistants to the priest. That would be the sons of Aaron. But as far as Korah seemed to be concerned, he had every right, and just as much right as did Aaron and his sons, to be priests. And so he said in verse 3, "You take too much upon yourselves. All this congregation is holy." We might say it this way today: "You ain't no better than any of the rest of us." And that's how we probably would put it. And that's what he's saying here at this point. We're just as good as you are. What makes you think you should be in charge? And so Korah is leading one rebellion, Dathan and Abiram are leading another. Probably, and you can tell by what they're saying, this was more a question of Moses' civil authority. What gives you the right to just issue capital punishment against someone who's picking up sticks on the Sabbath day? And you see this same mindset reflected on the next day, even after God had killed and taken out those 250 men and opened the earth and swallowed up Korah and Dathan and Abiram. The next day they're complaining, "Moses, you have killed the people of God." I don't know how in the world someone could reason that way. Like Moses said, this is an unusual thing. How often does the earth just open up and swallow people alive? But nevertheless, they're blaming Moses. It's just a common problem. But we have two disgruntled groups melding into one. Korah seemed to be the lead spokesman. And their complaint, again, verse 3, "All the congregation is holy." In other words, you're not any better than the rest of us. Was Moses perfect? No, he was not. After leading God's people for 40 years in the wilderness, he was only allowed to look over into the land of Canaan. because he failed on a given occasion, because he lost his temper. He failed to give God the glory. And so he was prohibited from entering into the land of Canaan after wandering for 40 years. His brother Aaron, was he perfect? No, he was not. You remember, it was Aaron who gave this crazy answer to his brother when he came down from Mount Sinai and he saw the people dancing around the golden calf that Aaron had hammered out and fashioned. What have you done, brother? Well, I took the gold earrings and the bracelets, I threw them in the fire, and out popped this calf. I mean, how absurd and ridiculous can one be? But that was Aaron's response to Moses. Was Aaron perfect? No, he was not. I do not know of a leader anywhere in the history of the world that was perfect. And certainly among the people of God, there has never been a man that God chose to be leader over his people that was perfect. Read the book of Judges. Those judges were great men, but they had some serious flaws, every one of them. Consider David, the quintessential definition, if you will, of what it means to be a king in Israel. And yet it was David who lusted after his neighbor's wife, killed his neighbor's husband, the one he's having a relationship with, so he can claim the child as his own, which it was his own, and cover his crime. David was far from perfect, though he was a man after God's own heart. Of the apostles, we think of Peter probably as the lead apostle. Our Catholic friends have carried that to a ridiculous view, claiming that he was the first head of the church. That is an unscriptural and even blasphemous view of the Apostle Peter. But nevertheless, they're correct in noting Peter was a great leader among the people of God. Was he perfect? Far from it. He cursed and swore, I don't even know this man. And then even after he was converted, and after the church was growing exponentially, it was Paul, Galatians 2, who withstood Peter to the face because he was playing the part of a hypocrite. Point being, there are no perfect leaders. The sin in Numbers 16 wasn't exposed by the congregation who's saying through Korah, you guys aren't any better than the rest of us. The sin was in questioning God's selection. That's the sin of Numbers chapter 16. And that's the sin committed by so many today. Many women, married women, complain and will sometimes reason. I don't have to do what my husband said because I'm smarter than he is. I have a better head on my shoulders than he does. I want to make this observation. My limited scope of experience, nevertheless, it is my experience. Most marriages I know, the wife probably has more raw intelligence than her husband. Oftentimes, she has a better temperament than does her husband. It does not negate God's selection. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. So when a woman says, I don't have to submit to my husband because he's stupid, or he's mean, or he's a jerk, or he's what, he may be all of those things, but when you do so, like Korah, you are questioning God's arrangement. In the year 95 AD, there was a problem that arose in the congregation at Corinth again. And it was a problem that was addressed by one of the elders of the church at Rome, a man by the name of Clement. And so he wrote a lengthy letter to the church at Corinth. And in this letter, he addressed the problem. The problem was there were a bunch of deacons in that congregation that thought they knew better than the elders how to run the church. And they were trying to impeach the eldership there. And so Clement wrote a long, lengthy epistle to address that problem. It would be nice if 95 AD, Corinth was the only time a congregation ever had a rebellion on its hand against the eldership. Unfortunately, many congregations have suffered because people like Korah will look at the eldership and say, I'm smarter than they are. I wouldn't have done that. That wasn't very bright. And so on and so forth. When you question the eldership, you're not questioning those men per se. You're questioning God's arrangement. God instructed Moses, you tell Israel to separate themselves from the tents of these men. Well, there's an obvious reason for that, and it's evident as we continue reading the text. This mindset, this attitude of I know just as well as you do, and I'm just as smart as you are, had already permeated throughout the congregation, and it had to be stopped. It's what Paul was saying in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. Get out from among the men of these the tents of these men. Have nothing to do with them. And the point Moses made, the rebellion is not against me, not against my brother Aaron. This rebellion is against the Lord. And that was the true nature of their sin. Here's something else worth noting before we get to our sermon. I haven't gotten there. I'm working on the sermon. I know it's hot. I don't know what's wrong with the air. We'll get it straightened out, but hang with me. Moses, after Dathan and Abiram said, we ain't coming to see you. Moses gave clear instruction to come see. We're not coming. Moses took the elders of Israel and went to their tent. There's a lesson here. When sin is in the camp, when someone is being rebellious, every effort should be made to restore that individual to their rightful place. However, there is a limit to what can be done. In Titus chapter 3, verse 9, avoid foolish disputes, genealogies, contentions, and strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and useless. Reject a divisive man after the first and second admonition, knowing that such a person is warped and sinning, being self-condemned. There is a limit to the measures that can be taken, particularly in some cases, and we have to make a difference. Jude tells us this. We have to make a difference. It's also a sad fact that when punishment is meted out by the leadership in any congregation, there will almost invariably be complainers. And the complaint was the day after this judgment was taken and executed by God, no less. The complaint was, you've killed the people of God. Moses hadn't done anything but stand up for the Lord and the Lord's arrangement. Let's think about that for a moment. Do people question God's arrangement today? Indeed they do. I saw something on Facebook this morning. I was trying to wake up and was scrolling through the post of one of my new friends that I've just come across when I met in school. And I had this interesting post. It was about someone who had changed their life and had given their life to the Lord, and how you can come out of the pit of despair and turn your life around. And I thought, this is really powerful. This is good. I might even share this on my Facebook page. And I kept watching it, and right in the middle of this whole discussion was the sinner's prayer. No, I can't share that. I can't support that. Why are we promoting this concept that has nothing to do with Scripture whatsoever? And my point is this. Whenever someone says, and I've had this said to me many times, Mark 16, 15 and 16 says, go into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. He that believes and is baptized shall be saved. I've had it said to me, and you probably have as well. I know that's what it says, but I know how I feel in my heart. When someone reasons this way, they are questioning God's arrangement and God's selection. God was very clear. Jesus made it very clear. Go and teach all nations, baptizing them into the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. To minimize the role of baptism in the plan of salvation is to question God's arrangement. There's another trend that's very troubling today. This is one I want to be very careful that I don't step on any landmines here, which is also a shame that we have to be so careful nowadays, but there are congregations of the Lord's people in this state that now are employing women to take a more active and leading role in the worship assembly. And those who visit our services from outside the Lord's church, of course, will sometimes question and wonder, why is it only men serve? I mean, this is the 21st century after all. I mean, we don't even have genders anymore. If you've not noticed, been to Target lately, I mean, we don't even know if we're boys or girls anymore. So what's the big deal about a girl leading in worship or a guy leading in worship? I mean, we've come a long way. That seemed to be the mindset of a lot of people. Well, the world may have gone a long way from the will of God, but 1 Timothy 2, 9 through 11 is still in my Bible. It has not been removed. And God's will regarding the selection of who leads in worship has not changed. Now, some of our ladies may argue, and rightly so. I'm smarter than the preacher. And I can lead songs better than Steve. And I can hand out the trays better than these guys. And I can do all these other things. I mean, why not? I mean, if we're talking about qualifications here, we're not talking about qualifications. We're talking about God's choice. It's not a question of who's smarter or brighter or better looking or more talented. It's a question of honoring God's selection. You say, well, how did God choose men because they're such brutes and Neanderthals? Why did he choose them to be in charge? You'll have to take that up with the Lord. We can only do what the Lord tells us to do. We can only follow the Lord's teaching. And so there are many ways we could illustrate the lesson from Numbers chapter 16. It really boils down to this. It's all a question of who is in charge in the Lord's church. Are we, by popular vote, or is the Lord by biblical decree? And I submit to you, the Lord is still in charge of his one true church, and he still directs the affairs of the church through his word. And it's our duty and responsibility to discover what is that word and what is that will, and follow that will as best we can to honor God's selection for the church. What about you? Are you honoring God's choice today? We're about to sing the song of invitation. We have a great song leader. We have great singers in this congregation. We're about to sing a great song, I have no doubt about that. While we're singing this song, I know some of you are probably wondering, should I obey the gospel today or not? Let me say this. It's God's choice. It's God's selection. That you obey from the heart that form of teaching that's been delivered to us. That you obey the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus, believing with all your heart Jesus is the Son of God, repenting of sin, confessing faith in his name, being buried in the grave of baptism, to rise to walk in newness of life. This is God's selection, and he will add you to his church. We just mentioned a couple of weeks ago, there's a changing attitude and mindset about the church. You can take it or leave it. That's not God's selection. God selected and ordained. Salvation occurs in the body of Christ, in the church. That's God's arrangement. You can honor God's arrangement today through gospel obedience, or being restored to your rightful place among the people of God. If you're subject to the invitation, we can help you in any way. Please make that need known altogether.